Hello, everybody. Robert, can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you good. I'm gonna turn my
Perfect.
camera on, make sure that, and you can hear me good?
Yep. No problem at all. And looks like we have Ryan and Anton and Adam here with us. So people will start trickling in as it gets closer. Usually, I give people 3 minutes over the time just to give a little extra time for to settle in.
Yep, sounds good. I get one message. Somebody else is getting ready to jump on, I think.
Hello, Corrine. Welcome in. You can always tell the people. You can always tell the people who work in payroll because they come early. Project managers, they're going to be 5 minutes late. Right, Corrine?
Sounds about right.
Yeah. The last time I had a webinar, when I started doing my whiteboard, I managed to spill my coffee all over my desk during the webinar. We'll see if I can avoid that this time. That didn't reduce my stress. That's for sure.
You don't want to be too relaxed when you're giving a webinar anyways, because you'll put people asleep.
Yeah, exactly. Hi, Trina. Hi, Jonathan. Welcome in. And Sharon's here. Hello, Sharon. Well, I'm glad you made it. Sounds like you need it, Sharon.
Yeah, maybe the ones that need it the most won't make it.
It's possibly true. But they're also the people who are least likely to be able to use it too. I could just picture myself when I needed it the most. There was, yeah, like I was so overwhelmed that anything, one more thing just seemed like impossibly hard to do.
Yeah.
that Levy here? Hi, Levy. Maybe it's Levi. I actually don't know.
Fine.
All right, we're at 10:30, so we'll give a few more minutes to have people trickle in. A lot of people just start signing up then. Adam is here. Welcome, Adam. Hello, Allie.
Kind of interested to know where people are from. Should we do that while we're waiting?
Yeah.
Post in the chat. We know some, and there's probably mostly Washington State, but
Oh, yeah, I was going to say Austin.
Hmm.
Sharon's in Austin. Davenport, Washington, Portland, Oregon, Lake North and South Dakota, representing Kalispell, Montana, another battleground.
And I'm in North Carolina.
Hi, Mabel. Lake North and South Dakota. That must be what, 50% of the population is here in the webinar then? Hi, Debbie. Hi, Sean.
Hello.
Then Ryan McDaniels is here. Hello, Ryan. Looks like the other 50% from Lake Norton showed up. Oh, 75%, Jonathan says. I don't know. I don't know how to take that, Jonathan. Is that like how are you doing that? Is that by weight or is it by intellectual capacity? Everyone, by the way, just as we're waiting for the last few people to trickle in, is posting where they're from in the chat. Okay, we're 3 minutes past. Oh, comedic capacity. Good. That's perfect. Well, we know where to aim our jokes in this whole presentation, Robert. By comedic capacity, he means he can be the butt of all the jokes. Well, welcome you guys. There'll be a few more people trickle in. There was just 23 people registered for the webinar, so a little bit smaller today. Feel free and jump in. Use your microphone. Use your camera if you'd like to ask questions. We're just a small group, so we should have plenty of time. Today, I'm kind of excited for this. This is the first time that I've broken out of what we normally present on. We, with all of the work that we've done in payroll and equipment and all the Vista related things that we've done for construction companies. I've started working with Robert last year, known Robert for many, many years, but I started working with him last year with stress management as things kind of got stressful in my life, and I had found it to be so useful that I asked him if he could come on and we could share it with some of you guys. There's so much in construction. We know that construction is one of the highest stress related jobs out there, especially as because of some of the like we hear about. If any of you guys are part of CFMA, there's a lot of suicide, a lot of depression, especially out in the field, but also in the office. And of course, the people that I generally work with, you guys are generally the more on the office side of things. But I just wanted to share some of the stuff that I've learned, and well, I wanted to share Robert with you guys because I've learned so much from him. It's actually more accurate. Um, I can my little journey, such as it is. So if you guys, I'll share my whiteboard here. Uh, Back in early, must have been September of last year, I decided, I'm going to try this whole personal scorecard thing. So I put together a scorecard for myself, and every week, I started tracking uh, all of 9 things every day, that I could do: exercising, eating right, whether or not I was able to express gratitude, whether I was able to stretch, some mindfulness things in there, all of these different things that you kind of read about all the time. And I would I filled them in with a different color, whether or not every day I'm able to do them, right? So if I was able to eat right, I would fill it in with green, like that. um, and I was just tackling all this on my own because, I'm a big boy and I know all these things. I've read all these different books. I should be able to do it on my own. Well, in November of last year, my wife, for various reasons, ended up in the hospital for a week. And of all of the on my scorecard, a couple weeks afterward, on the scorecard, the only thing I had filled in for the entire week was one single day. I had one black dot in the middle of the week, like that. So of all of the things I could have filled in, I had one black dot. That was specifically I had slept one 8-hour night. That was what I had decided for mine. I slept one 8-hour night that entire week, and everything else I hadn't done. I hadn't eaten right. I hadn't exercised. I hadn't stretched. I hadn't done any of the mindfulness. I hadn't done any of this stuff that I had decided was going to be good for me. And of course, that was the week that I needed it the most, uh, because I needed to be there for my kids and then whatever else. Well, I felt terrible that week. I was very low energy. I was extremely cranky. I was under just a pile of stress with Rebecca in the hospital. I was trying to figure all this stuff out. I was like, boy, it's not working out so well to try to do this on my own. And around that time, one of my good friends who had started to work with Robert. I had, of course, known Robert, like I said, for years, and I called him up and asked him if he could help me do this. Robert is an occupational therapist in Wilmington, North Carolina, and more recently, he's been expanding what he's done in his clinic there in North Carolina to online and help people, so that even people on the far side of the country like me can help. He's been able to help people with that. One of the things that I really appreciated about working with Robert that has lined up really well with kind of the approach that we take here with our construction management and our financial side of things is that he takes the education first approach. It's not so much like, oh, sign up and here we're going to give you a silver bullet and and all of a sudden everything's going to change. But it's more like he led me through, he found out where I was at, he led me through what I actually needed to know, and coached me so that I could actually get this uh, get this really integrated in my life. Well, Rebecca ended up back in the hospital, unfortunately, in April. So that was 4.5 months after I started. And that particular week, I went back and accounted. And uh, of all of the things that could have been filled out, where I had one that time, so one, it was I had almost all of them. It was something like 88% of the items were filled out that week. Otherwise, nothing had changed. She was in the hospital again. It was still stressful, but I had exercised every day. I was stretching every day. I was in a position that I could actually do something. That I was able to. I remember that particular Wednesday when she was in the hospital. I told the kids, "All right, it's game night, kids." And I got home from work and I had energy. We got pizza and we had a game night instead of it being me getting home from work and saying, let's go to bed early, kids," and them wishing that Mama was home even more than they were before. Um, it really made a huge difference for me, and I felt like that I was actually able to not get rid of stress, because I don't think that's even the goal, but it was more like I was able to manage the vicissitudes of life. I was able to manage the things that hit me. Anyways, because of that, I just wanted to share. I asked him if he could come on. He graciously agreed to come on and share this with you guys. If it helps you guys, that'd be great. I just wanted to share in what we've learned together. So that's that was my introduction, Robert. So from here, it's all up to you. Over to you, and I figure that I'll just turn over the presentation.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that, you sharing that story very openly. They're pretty personal things. And that, I think that's a good place to kind of start to see. So I'm going to share a lot of PowerPoint. I'm going to go through things. There's probably going to be things you already know. But I really believe you're going to learn something today too. If you can walk away with something that you can put to use right away. Just real short, Mike already kind of introduced real short about who I am or how I got into this. So I've been doing occupational therapy for, I guess it's 25 years. My first job was in traumatic brain injury, but then I've worked with mostly with elderly. I've worked nursing homes, I worked home health, and then outpatient. And kind of how that segued into what I'm doing now is, in a way, I felt like most of the misery that I saw in my clients a lot of it was related to lifestyle, and it felt like a lot of it was so preventable, but obviously it's difficult to do. I could see stress being a big factor, even in the ones that were retired. So I kind of had an interest in learning how I could maybe best help them that way. But in a way, I felt like I was downriver picking people out of the river. And so one way I guess you can put it is now I'm trying to go upstream a little bit and see why people are falling in the first place. So working a little bit more preventive. But it's been real rewarding, even working with the elderly population. And when I started trying to apply more lifestyle coaching, you could say, even to them, I could see that it's never too late. I had a 80-year-old client that lost 80 pounds, and she had a condition called lymphedema, which we worked with, and that got better. Her knee pain got better. She ended up not needing knee surgery, and that was at age 80. So that's pretty inspiring. So if a person can do that at that age, I really felt inspired that if I could work with people, because there's a lot of misery and suffering that happens even at all ages that could be preventable, with with knowing the right things and without it having to be overwhelming. So one of the factors, Michael mentioned like eating, sleeping, and stress management and physical activity. So we're going to focus mostly on stress management today, or that is the topic of today. And but I do think that those four things tie together really well. So you almost can't address one without addressing the other,
I didn't
they will
realize that you
be.
started with traumatic brain injury. Well, that explains. I mean, anybody who's willingly working in construction probably has had traumatic brain injury. So I think that fits real well here with this group.
Oh, yeah. There you go. There you go.
At least in Lake Norden.
Yeah. So I guess I should share am I sharing my screen right now? No.
Nope.
Okay, so let me do that first, because we are going to start running through a bunch of PowerPoint slides. The whole screen.
Perfect. See it now.
So you can see it now. Okay. Okay, so I titled it "Surfing the Waves of Stress," and the metaphor. The reason I like that metaphor is if you compare it to surfing, we can either ride a wave or we can get pummeled by it. We live here on the East Coast, so that's something we can relate to. And I don't know, a lot of you are on the West Coast. And burnout is a real thing. So we want to show some ways that we can prevent burnout. So again, going upriver and try to work on it more from a preventive side. So I guess a quick disclaimer would be that I am not a doctor or a psychiatrist or a psychologist. If we are experiencing symptoms that are causing it hard for us to do our work, I strongly recommend to get the medical professional help that we need. A coach is not going to replace that. We're working on a preventive side. Okay, so what we're going to learn today is what stress is and why it matters. We're going to talk about an alternative way to think about stress. I'm hoping to kind of stretch our thinking a little bit about the definition of stress, because that I believe is really helpful then when we're going to start addressing it. So it's important to really understand what it is. But most importantly, we're going to talk about what we can actually do about it. And I do want you, being this is not an entire training program, we could talk for weeks about this, but I want you to walk away with some tool that you can put to use right away. So I am going to show you some quick fix. But like Michael said, there's no silver bullet, but there are some really proven things that we can put to use right away. Then I'm going to tell you some success stories. You already heard Michael, but I think that helps, because if we're going to make these changes, they're not easy to make. If we're going to change our habits, we want to know that it can actually work, and seeing that it has worked for some people, I believe, can be really helpful. And then at the end, I do want to share a little bit about how I could work with, or how our company could work with your team to try to thrive and feel better more often. But I would like to have a little bit of interaction from you guys, just to get a feel for where we're at and what we believe about stress right now. So if you may, just put in the chat box a number. So how dangerous do you believe now that stress is on a scale 1 to 10? And I guess 10, we could call it like extremely dangerous. And 1 would be, doesn't really matter. There's no real danger in stress. I'd love to see some numbers in the chat box. And as you're typing that in, I don't know, can I see the chat box when I'm in this view? Do you see any coming on?
Yeah, they're coming. And you can just hit, if you, I think you might have to go up to the top and hit show chat.
Okay, probably
But I can read them out loud. Corrine says 8, Jonathan says 8, Ryan says 8, Trina says 9, Sharon says 8 or 9, Debbie says 8, Sean says 9, Levy says 8.
Okay, good. That's good. I get a
Mabel's at 9.
Yeah. And I imagine that the ones that signed up for the seminar are probably the ones that do see that there is a danger in stress.
Yeah, exactly.
So what would be, and then if you could just put some one-word answers in the chat to the second question, what are some of the dangers with stress that you guys can think of? Like what could be the dangerous outcomes of stress? Why is it dangerous? See if we get any just one-word answers there.
I wrote overeating. It was my great uncle who told me, Michael, you're like me. We just eat away our stress. He told me.
Not unusual. Oh.
Mabel says lack of sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Green says physical illness. Debbie, high blood pressure.
Mm-hmm. Yep, those are all real. I'll keep going, but feel free to butt in there.
Yeah, personal relationship stuff, Sharon says.
Yeah, Yep, can certainly have an effect of that. And then lastly, I'd like to see some examples, because I know people know a lot more about stress now than we used to. What are some ways that you deal with stress now, or that you know would be a way to deal with stress?
I could put overeating on there again for myself. I mean, not saying not a good way, but
no, and feel free to put the good and the bad ways. So there's definitely destructive ways to deal with stress, and we're probably all familiar with that.
Exercise outdoors, Trina says. To-do list.
Yes.
Walk outside, meditate. Don't skimp on sleep or eating. Ooh, skimping on eating. I've heard people doing that too. Fishing or unplugging from the day-to-day, Jonathan says. Not dealing with it, Corrine says.
We'll get into that a little bit too.
Yeah.
That might go on the negative side of things. Okay, so we'll keep going. So bear with me. I am going to throw a lot of statistics at you here for a little while, but I think it's good to kind of lay the groundwork for why this matters. Although you guys rated high numbers, I know that it matters, but some of these numbers can be pretty surprising. So from a business point of view, even this is a Gallup poll from 2022, I believe, so it's pretty recent. Showed that only 32% of employees feel engaged at work. And of those, when they answered on questions, 18% of them actually felt actively disengaged. That's a pretty strong word. So it's easy to see where that's a problem. Another staggering statistic is that 66% of US workers are chronically tired or fatigued. And we hear that. We hear people complain of chronically tired and fatigued a lot. 63% of US workers report that they're ready to quit their jobs. So if the company you work for is average, that means more than half are thinking about quitting their jobs because of work-related stress. And on the more serious note, and Michael brought that up in the beginning, 21%, that's 2 out of 10 have a preliminary diagnosis of a mental illness. The two most common ones are anxiety and depression. So that is that's pandemic size proportions. And if we look at it worldwide, when it comes to burnout I think is a term that has been used in Europe longer than it has here. And they actually, I know in Sweden, where I'm from, they have actual treatment centers for burnout, or have had that for a long time. I've heard now that there are such places here in America as well. But 1 of 4 employees worldwide reports burnout symptoms.
Hey, Robert, if you
Yeah.
can, real quick, can you turn off your video and turn it back on? I think it froze.
Oh, okay.
Your slideshow's being just fine, but the video is frozen.
That better?
Yeah, you're back.
Okay, good. So, and I know we have people here in the construction world, and many of you maybe are accountants, but then if we have project managers, I think we have a classic problem that when it comes to going from working in the field and then starting to work in the office. You've probably seen like the belly start to grow as we enter into the office, and it's not surprising. I think we all intuitively kind of know why that's happening. So we're going from an intense physical workload, and we're eating accordingly. We're sleeping good because we've been we've worked hard physically during the day, but then we start, as we advance in our career, we end up more sedentary. But our body isn't really ready for that. It's needing, or the old habits that worked okay when we were in the field can really start working against us when we become more sort of locked to the desk. And that's why I do think that this specifically in construction, there may be a lot of problems with lifestyle and health for those that have moved into the office. So what are some of the symptoms of stress and burnout risk? So we can think of it in 3 different ways. There's change of mood, there's change of behavior, and there's organ-related symptoms. So examples of change of mood that can happen when we start recognizing burnout is nervousness, an inability to relax. We're not able to turn off. We're like always on. And of course, it can lead to depression and sadness. We can have compensatory behavior, loss of impulse control, or irritability and aggression. So that's where we kind of start getting snappy, and we try to compensate for this sort of yucky feeling that we have in other destructive ways that can hurt us and those around us. That's kind of where we kick the cat because we're just too stressed out. Organ-related symptoms, and we'll get into that a little bit more, just how that ties in. Most people are much more aware of that now, that it can affect our physical health. in a big way. So, but sleeping disorders, and that has a hormonal explanation to why stress, chronic stress, can affect sleep. We can experience chronic pain, headaches, and gastrointestinal. Most of us know that too. That stomach. We know that we feel stress in the stomach. So if it's a constant chronic, it can start to have permanent damage to the gastrointestinal area. We'll get into a little bit more on the physical side of stress. So to continue to really show the size of this problem and also how it affects an organization or a business. So kind of the downward slope that we had down as we're heading towards burnout can look something like this. We start off just by that chronic fatigue, we're tired a lot, and then we start disengaging. And as we're disengaging, we're just less interested in what's happening around us. And if that continues down that slope, we end up in something we call presenteeism, which is where it's a step before absenteeism. So we're actually at work, we're clocking in, but we're just there. And you can imagine, even for an organization, what that costs a company. It's harder to put a number on that, but they've tried. But if we start with absenteeism, that's a little easier to measure. But if we're going to put this in dollar figures, it's estimated about $300 billion per year is what it's costing the U.S. industry just in absenteeism due to stress. So this is specifically due to stress-related absenteeism. But then we also have this where we are at work, but we're just not able to get a lot done. And somehow the economists have tried to put a number on that. I think the number was actually $1,986, but that was ridiculously specific, so I put 2,000. So loss of productivity due to fatigue is costing about $2,000 per employee per year in a company. That's what they're estimating. I threw this in last minute because I think one misconception is that burnout is like a sign of weakness, and that it's or maybe laziness. But just from my own personal experience throughout life, I can top of my head think of 3 people I know, 3 that ended up in the hospital thinking that they were having a heart attack or a cardiac event. And at the hospital found out that their heart was just fine. And in each 3 of these are people I know personally. Each 3 of these, they were told that this was a stress-related event that they had. The 2 first were in Sweden, and there you can take vacations a lot easier than here. And they were ordered by the doctor to take at least a week vacation and leave town. And of course, they were very stressed because they had a big workload. So they were trying to fight the doctor on this. But he said, if you don't, it's life-threatening. You got to go. So it did help. It did work in both those cases. These were not lazy people. These were very driven people, very passionate about their jobs, high standards on themselves, and neither one of them really thought that they had a problem with stress. So I kind of use that just to say that that it's something that's worth for all of us to really pay attention to. So let's talk a little bit about the physiological response to stress. And I'm just going to fly through this slide, and then I'm going to come back to it once we understand why our bodies were designed to do this, because it's kind of strange. Our bodies are beautifully designed, but why is it working against us in this way? But these are some ways that the physical body responds to a stressful situation. So, or something that's perceived as a stress. In other words, it's perceived as a threat, and I'm sure you've heard of the fight or flight mechanism. So, for some reason, our brain picks up that there's a threat here, and it starts to prepare itself. And these are some of the ways. So we get increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, blood clotting factors rise. Blood is directed away from digestion, blood directed towards the large muscles. Salivary glands produce less saliva, so we get the dry mouth. Our brain alertness actually increases in a way, but it's laser focused. It's tunnel vision. We don't know much what's going on outside of the thing that we're focusing on, but we can do that with a very high intensity under stress. Blood sugar levels rise. Insulin production decreases at first. Increased cholesterol, bone formation decrease, breathing increases, sodium in water is retained, bowel and bladder control decreases, inflammation increases, and decreased sexual function. Now, why would all those things, why would our body respond like that to stress? Why would that make any sense? Most things in our body does make sense when we really start looking at it. So most people have probably heard of fight, flight, the fight or flight, but there's actually two more words to that. There's freeze and there's nurture. So this stress response system was designed to keep us alive in life-threatening situations, physically life-threatening situations. That's what it's designed to do, and it does that in a very beautiful way. We have probably survived thanks to it many times, or we may have saved somebody else's life thanks to this amazing ability of our body to get that laser focused and be prepared. Our bodies are very proactive. It tries to, all these organs and functions and systems we have in our body, they always try to be a step ahead, including the clock. Yeah, we actually have an internal clock that tries to stay a step ahead of what the body thinks is going to happen next. That's a topic for a whole nother lesson, but it's really fascinating, called circadian rhythms. But we're talking about stress. I'm just gonna do an oversimplified, and I say that because the brain and the body and all these systems are super complicated, and I can't claim to even know small percentage of it and understand. But in short, one way to think of this stress response is we have the amygdala that sits in very deep inside of the brain. Take one step back. You may know this already, but one way to think about the brain is in layers. So if we go real deep inside, you sometimes it's called the lizard brain, and that kind of gives the picture that's very, very primitive. The deeper inside of the brain we get, the more primitive it is, the more it just reacts to stimuli. So you got the stimulus response reaction happens deep inside of the brain. Then you go out a little bit and you call it the monkey brain, and then you get to the human brain. In how advanced it is and what it can do. So what happens under stress is our senses pick up on something. Our vision, our hearing, our sensation, our smell, but also our own thoughts. And the amygdala picks up on, the amygdala is a part of the brain that's a little bit of a control center for this fight or flight mechanism. So it picks up on this from the senses. And it's important to understand that this happens outside of our awareness. We are aware of a very small percentage of the sensory input that we have coming to us, which is good because we would be so overwhelmed if we were aware of everything. So right now you're looking at this screen and you're not thinking about the colors of the wall in your office. But if the colors of the wall in your office suddenly changed, that would be a pretty odd occurrence, and your attention would be drawn, and you would all of a sudden notice, and you would realize that you knew what color they were before. It's kind of like when a fan turns off and it feels like you heard it a second before it turned off. That means you were hearing it the whole time, but your focus wasn't on it. Your brain was picking up on it. So fortunately, our brain does all this stuff outside of our awareness, so we don't have to be focused. But that also means we're not making any decisions at that level. The brain is making all kinds of decisions for us, and it leaves the big, important, new, novel decisions to us. Those big things happen out in the outer parts of the brain, in the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala picks up on what's happening, does a really quick check with the hippocampus that sits right near the amygdala. And the hippocampus has memories stored. These are the kind of associative memories. You know when you smell something and it brings you right back to a place, maybe your grandparents' house, and you can almost see yourself as a 9-year-old in that place. That's that has some to do with the hippocampus, that there's memories, deep type memories that also are outside of our awareness. We just associate different things. So the hippocampus has some stored memories as to what might be a danger. It's a pretty rough brush. It's not real specific. So it has association. So when the amygdala communicates with the hippocampus, it happens extremely fast. It just does a quick check and says, is this dangerous or not? Well, based on some previous memories, yes, this is probably a danger. Probably should start prepping for a fight. And so then the amygdala communicates with the pituitary gland, who then communicates with the adrenal gland that sits near the kidneys, and then all kinds of hormones starts going out. Hormones are messengers. So our body communicates through nerve signals, but it also communicates with hormones. So hormones are like little messengers that go around in the body and tells different organs and cells what to do at this time. So they all get the memo that there's a danger going on right now, and we got to prepare to either fight or run really fast. So that's what the body is doing. It's starting to prepare for that. It's starting to breathe faster. It's starting to convert glycogen to glucose. It increases the blood pressure. It gives us that tunnel vision. So it's kind of ignoring the peripheral vision for right now, because we got to know where this. So we'll use the fighting a lion as an example. It's got to be able to focus on exactly what this lion is doing so that we're ready for this fight, or if we're going to run or freeze, which is play dead, or if we're going to nurture, that's more taking care of our offspring, our children, or our you could say our tribe, our family. We have a real protective instinct that comes under stress. That's probably why sometimes you get these departmental conflicts within an organization, where when there's a lot of stress in an organization, this nurturing instinct can kick in, and the different departments start circling the wagons and just defending their own turf, because that's what we do under stress. And so you can see where these are really, really useful things in real life-threatening situations, but they can backfire on us really bad. So in short, I think we can say one explanation to why we have such a problem with stress today, it's not that we live any more dangerous lives. If we think of people that have lived before us, they had some real things to be worried about. I mean, freezing to death, dehydrating, starving to death, getting eaten up by a lion, or getting killed by some angry neighbors. So they certainly had things to stress about, but it was often in a more of an acute form of stress. The body responded in all of these different ways, and when the danger was over, the prefrontal cortex can kick in and calm it down really fast. They had the ability to calm themselves down because their stressors were acute. So acute stress is not what's dangerous. Acute stress actually helps us train our ability to handle stress, as long as we have enough recovery. So when we're talking about stress, what we're looking for is not to eliminate stress. And I'm going to explain a little more about why that is. What we're looking for is training our ability to calm back down and giving us space to recover, giving us space to turn off. Then it's amazing what we actually can handle. And the other thing with this picture that's important is to think, once we're giving a little bit more time, then the prefrontal cortex can get involved. The prefrontal cortex is more logic, it's more problem solving, it's more big picture. And when it can take a step back, we can take a step back and we can see the bigger picture of the situation, then the prefrontal cortex has a chance to get more involved. Then we can solve the problem rather than fight it. So that's a goal with stress management too, is to train our prefrontal cortex to kick in rather than this fight or flight mechanism, because the stressors that we're dealing with in our day and time, in our modern day and time, there are very few that we can solve by fighting or running or freezing or nurturing. Those usually aren't very good solutions to the type of problems we have. And you can probably imagine what I'm talking about there. So let's go back to the slide that I showed you earlier. So now that you understand the purpose of the stress response, now it makes more sense to see, so why are we getting these physical problems from stress? Why is this body doing this? Well, if we're going to fight a lion, we need increased heart rate. Blood pressure helps to push the blood into the muscles. Why would blood clotting factors rise? It's because if we get cut in the fight, we don't want to bleed to death. So the body is ready to stop the bleeding so that we won't bleed to death. That's a beautiful thing. But of course, if it's chronic stress and it sits with us all the time, now we have increased blood clotting factors that are unnecessary, and instead they backfire on us. There's your link to heart attacks. Most of us know that chronic stress is linked to heart attacks, and there's one of the reasons. Well, the blood pressure and the blood clotting factor. Blood is directed away from digestion. That's why we get ulcers. That's just a priority order. So the body allocates resources to where it thinks that they're needed, and digesting the hot dog we just ate is not a priority if we're fighting for our lives. So he just says, we'll hold off on that for now. We'll see if we even need that hot dog. If we survive, then we'll digest that hot dog. That's why we get stomach problems. Blood directed to large muscles makes sense if we're going to run or fight, but when we're sitting at a desk and blood's rushing to our large muscles, we get tension headaches, big muscles on our back get tight, and we get all kinds of musculoskeletal problems because of stress. Salivary glands produce less saliva. Saliva is part of the digestive system, so I believe that that's because just low priority right now. We don't need a bunch of saliva right now because we're not going to be eating while we're fighting. Brain alertness, increased tunnel vision, I explained that. Blood sugar levels rise, that's also for the fight or flight. So our body can raise our blood sugar levels by lowering insulin, and it does that, and the liver can convert even protein into glucose. So if we're going to run, if we're going to fight, we need sugar glucose to go into our muscles as energy. So it preps for that. When we don't run or fight, that sugar lies around, and then that's why I say insulin production decreases at first. Insulin goes down, that allows the blood sugar to go up. But when the blood sugar stays high for a long time under chronic stress, then the insulin has to go up to get that back down. And what does it do with that sugar? It turns it into fat because it can't turn it back into protein really. So it may have actually taken that from our muscles if we didn't have enough protein in us. It might have actually converted muscle into glucose. And then when it lingers, it turns that then into fat. So there's a link between that belly that we end up developing, waist circumference that increases with stress. Strong correlation between stress and obesity, and especially around the waist. That seems to be where the stress fat goes. Increased cholesterol also has to do with transporting energy through the blood. That can even matter on one cholesterol test. If you're more stressed when you go in to take your blood work, it can change. It isn't like a constant. Bone formation decrease, so there's a link to osteoporosis. That's also a priority order. Repairing bones is more like that's when the car's in the shop. That's during the slow times when we can repair, and that doesn't need to be done when we're fighting or flighting. Breathing increases, that's pretty obvious. Sodium in water is retained. That's why another reason we gain weight, we gain water weight when we're under a lot of chronic stress. Bowel and bladder control decreases. We know about that. Inflammation. We could do a whole session just on inflammation. Inflammation, all these things that I've seen when I've worked in nursing homes and home health and with the elderly, a huge percentage of these chronic illnesses that people deal with in America can be tied back to chronic inflammation. And inflammation is just like stress. It's a really good thing when it's acute. Inflammation helps to fight off bacteria in a wound. So in the same beautiful, ingenious way, our bodies were created in this way, that if we get a cut, we need inflammation in that area to fight off bacteria. Acute, that's good. That's why it gets red around the wound. But inflammation that lingers in our body over and over again in a chronic way backfires. So any diagnosis that ends with the word itis is inflammation. And then decreased sexual function. That's probably a priority order, not something one is concerned about when you're fighting a lion. Okay, so I won't linger on this for too long, because I've already kind of explained it. But now you can probably see the link to these problems. And if I were to pull up a chart in any nursing home that I've worked in, this is pretty much what they look like, the diagnosed list. And that was one thing that got me interested in this. It's like, why does everybody's chart look the same? Why do everybody have the same problems? And then when I started learning about stress and saw that it links to all of these things that I saw in all of the charts. These are very much Western modern world problems. We live in a world that has mostly chronic conditions, is what the medical system is occupied with trying to help. And most of the methods that we have to help are very much designed towards acute problems. And that's why we get a little bit of a disconnect. That's why we sometimes feel like the help that we get is very temporary, because it is designed to, most of it is designed to help in an acute way. And we're really good at that. We're really good at, or the medical world is very, very good at keeping us alive and dealing with the acute effects of these things. So let's see how we're doing on time. Okay, so I hope I haven't lost anyone yet, or that anyone is getting ready to jump off, because here's a little irony. I asked you in the beginning, how dangerous do you think that stress is? One study that they did where they asked people that question and then followed them and looked at these physiological stress responses that I just talked about. People that were aware of, because it's true that stress is dangerous, and people that were aware of that and educated on that and knew that stress is dangerous were actually at a higher risk for heart attacks and a higher risk to get those symptoms that I just talked about. So in one way, I have done you a disservice if you didn't know any of the things I just talked about, and I just told you all of this. All I've done so far is giving you something else to stress about. So it's not really helping us to just know that stress is dangerous, because when something feels like, if we feel like we don't know what to do about it, then we've just added to the stressors. Well, great, now I got to worry about that too. I'm going to get a heart attack because I'm stressed all the time. So don't leave. You got to also hear what you can do about it. So let's jump into that. That's the most important part. And I really hope that at the end of this, you will at least feel like there are things that can be done about it.
Sharon says, "Gee, thanks, Robert," and in the chat. And Debbie said, "Have to hop off." But luckily, she also said, "I'll see Robert tomorrow." So you guys, she must know you otherwise. So you're gonna have to fill her in on the rest of it, so you don't leave her. She only has one day of stress, of extra stress from everything you taught us.
That's right. We'll have to touch base on about the rest of it, Debbie. Okay, so what can we do about it? First, take a big picture step back, and there's two sort of angles to attack it from. One is external and one is internal. So of course, externally, we can work on the stressors themselves. And I would say Silvertrek does that and helps you with that. Because when you create these systems that were causing stressors in your organization and you start working on those, obviously we can reduce a lot of stressors that are coming our way. So we can reduce the inflow of stressors by doing these proactive things. The tough part is, and the reason you probably need somebody like Silvertrek to do that, is the tunnel vision. So when we are in a state of stress, remember, we get tunnel vision, which means we can be the smartest person on the planet. We can be extremely business savvy, but because we are under stress, our brains aren't thinking about the long-term big picture. It has zeroed it in self down on survival. And that's why sometimes a coach can seem like a genius when they walk in and they say, hey, why don't you do it this way? That's because your coach is not in your tunnel. They're outside of your tunnel. When they can see it, there's a different part of their brain that can kick in. So externally working on it is hugely important, but that's not what I'm going to be addressing today. We're going to talk more about the internal side of it. So how can we actually improve our ability to handle the stress that comes to us? So one way to talk about it would be distress tolerance. Like how much distress can we handle, and how do we handle it, and how do we build our resilience to the stressors that are coming our way? Because we can't eliminate all the stressors. Most of you have probably heard of the Serenity Prayer. Nobody really, I think, knows where it came from. I think it was found written on a wall somewhere. But the AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, have made it famous. But I think if you take away one thing from today, the Serenity Prayer is so universal that it can be applied, I believe, on any stressful situation that you're in, and it's probably one of the most helpful ways of thinking when it comes to dealing with stressors in life. So you may have heard it before. I have it written on the wall in my office, where it says, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things that I can, and wisdom to know the difference. That's the core of stress management, I would say. So we have to distinguish between the things we can do something with, and those could be external things, and they could be internal things, and then also be able to accept things that we can't change. That in itself can give an almost instant relief, even though the problem is still there. Once we realize that I'm beating my head against the wall, that I can't move, but there's something over here that I can work on. And when we can get our focus shifted from this to the thing we can work on, we can already start to feel better. So another way to look at different aspects of working with it is we can work on an individual level. So now I'm talking about organizations, businesses. In a business, we can work on it on an organizational level. And again, I think that's where Silver Trek and business consulting comes in, or working on having maybe your quarterly meetings. You're working on it on an organization level. How can we as an organization reduce the stressors on us as an organization through processes and procedures and things like that? Problem solving. But we can also work in a similar way on a team level, but we can also on a team level, we can learn some of these things that I'm going to be talking about today. For example, we can work on lifestyle on a team level. It can work very well. There's some studies that have shown that the team level is one of the most effective sort of levels to work on in an organization to improve lifestyle and reduce stress and burnout. And then we can work on individual level. And I would say not everyone needs full-on individual coaching. And that's, I think, why the team level can work well, because a lot of people can learn these things. Example, some of the things I'm teaching today, and start implementing them, and it can help. And then there's some that are going to need much more individual, or work on it more individually. So we can work on all three levels. So I know I'm moving kind of fast, but let's now I want you guys to think a little bit again here. And actually, I'm get ready for the chat box, because I'm going to ask another question. And some of you may have heard my spill on this already, so don't give away the answer if you have. But there are many different ways to define stress. And I'm going to present one way to define stress. And it's not that they're right or wrong. The word stress can mean so many things. In engineering and construction, you talk about stress when you talk about the load on a 2x4, for example. How much stress tolerance does a 2x4 have? But so that's one definition of stress. We're talking, of course, more about a psychological type of, more like a distress. What would you say if we had a continuum and we said that stress, high stress is over here? What would the opposite be? And throw some words into the chat box if you don't mind. What word pops to your mind when you think stress over here? What's the opposite? And I don't see the chat box, so if
I
you want to.
I can read it out loud here. Sharon says peace.
Mhm. Any other
Sleep.
thoughts?
Sleep. There's some other people typing here.
Mm-hmm.
Corinne
Sleep,
says
yeah.
easiness.
Easiness. Mm-hmm.
Just first thing that pops into your guys' head here.
Yep. It's not a quiz because you can define stress in so many different ways. But one way to understand a word or how we think about a word is to think about what is the opposite.
Joy.
And
Clear mind.
mhm. Mhm. Very good ones. Yeah. So far, I think all of those fit in
Still.
one definition of stress.
Apathy.
There we go.
Still some more people typing here.
And some are probably wondering, what did you mean by apathy? Yeah, feel free to keep typing, but I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to give you one way to think about stress. If the definition of the stress we're talking about now is this, it's what we feel or experience when something that we deeply care about is at stake. So think about that. Think about think about something that's causing you stress in your life right now, and then think, does that definition fit? Something that you deeply care about is at stake.
That
So,
completely makes sense to me. I mean, even like what I was talking about when I introduced in the introduction that when my wife was in the hospital, that
mhm,
I mean, somebody I deeply cared about was suffering. That there it
mhm,
was. It
mhm.
was that caused stress.
Yep. When we use that definition, just having that definition, I think, helps to a certain point. Not that it takes away the stressor, but it can help us accept the fact that we have that stressor, because we might also realize that we don't want to eliminate that stressor because we care so much about it. Now, we might also come to the conclusion that actually I'm feeling a bunch of stress about something I really don't care that much about. Well, that can help us to scratch that one off the list. There's a book that was written that was called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and it's all small stuff. I don't agree with that title. It's a good book, and he makes a good point in there about how much we stress about that really is small stuff. And we do tend to stress about small stuff. But I don't agree with the statement in itself that it's all small stuff. And your example is perfect. That's not small stuff. When our wife is in the hospital and we got to take care of the kids at home, that's no little thing. So there's no wonder that we're experiencing stress. It would be more strange if we didn't. So according to that definition, the opposite of that would be apathy.
Ooh, I think Ryan wins a point.
So that and that definition has helped me, because then I've also realized that I don't want to eliminate all of my stress. And I related to this to one of my clients once, and he said, he goes, that explains something. He said, my dad, when he was pretty young, had a heart attack. The doctor told him this heart attack was because of your stress. His coping mechanism, and you can't fault him for it, was to not care. And he said it was to the point where somebody would come and tell him that somebody had died, a family member had died. He would say, "No, I don't want to hear it." He didn't want to feel anything. He didn't, because he was afraid. He was afraid of the stress itself, and he was afraid that if I stress about this family member dying, I'm going to have a heart attack. So he put up this thick wall. And I think most of us, when we hear that story, we're not envious of him. It's not a life that we probably want. So in a way, we see that, well, we don't want, and that's why if I see a stress management program that promises to eliminate stress, I would say stay away from it, because we don't want to eliminate stress. Because the very things we're stressed about are the very things that creates meaning in our life and creates purpose in our life. So the solution is not to try to get rid of all of it. Like I said, we can work externally and get rid of the ones that don't need to be there, and also distinguish which ones really do matter. So in another interesting study, when they looked at then, so what is it that causes people to have more or less stress? And so they actually quantified stressors in people's lives. That's like scientists can do. They can create an algorithm and they can say, okay, these many things are happening in these people's lives. And they gave them a stress score and basically said, how many stressors do these people have? And then they monitored their physiological symptoms. And here was another surprise. There was no correlation. There was no correlation between how many bad things are happening to a person, or how much stress they're under, stressors that they're under, and how much physical ailment they had from stress. So the experience of stress wasn't related to what was happening to them. So the conclusion proves kind of that saying that it's not what happens to us, it's what we do about it. That's a stress. That's a expression, but I reworded it this way: it's what we perceive that it means. So when they studied this a little deeper, they saw that. So what was the difference? And the difference was when something happens to a person, then they interpret that in their own, based on their own experience and belief system and ability to handle stress and their outlook and their focus and all those things. And then they apply a meaning to it and they say, what does this mean? And that whether that meaning took a really negative turn or a more positive outlook, that had the biggest say in how much stress related symptoms they were experiencing. So the cool thing with that is that means there's something we can do there. We can actually learn these things, and we can and sometimes it could be a matter of shifting a focus. That's what we might have experienced when we've been under stress and a good friend happens to say that right thing, that very thing we needed to hear, and all of a sudden we feel much better. And what was the magic? Well, part of it was that it shifted our focus from something to something. So that's more of on a deeper level on working on stress management. So, for example, think about what words you're using in your head. So, are you nervous or are you keyed up? So, I have to admit, I was going to talk in front of you guys, and talking in front of and giving a presentation can make a person nervous, and a lot of people will say, "Are you nervous?" Well, if we were to tell ourselves, "Man, I'm nervous. I'm so nervous. I need to calm down." And we were kind of joking in the beginning that you don't want to be too calm when you're giving a presentation. So is that really what we want? If we're going to give a presentation, or we're going to have a meeting about something and we're nervous about it, is calming down exactly what we need right then? Or maybe we're not nervous. Maybe we're keyed up. Maybe we're excited, and just shifting how we even think about that feeling. It's the same feeling, really. Nervousness and being keyed up, very closely related. And we can kind of think, well, maybe it's okay that I'm a little bit, my hands are shaking a little bit. I got all this adrenaline. I got this laser focus. I need this little bit of stress right now so that I don't put people to sleep. When something happens to us, are we calling it a misfortune, or are we calling it a challenge? When we have a big workload or we're having to do something, is it a burden or a duty responsibility? And I think, mind, Michael, I'll use your example so we can make these abstract things tangible. When you're taking care of the kids at home, you're probably feeling that it's a sense of responsibility that you have as a dad. And it's easier to carry a sense of duty and responsibility than to carry a burden that feels like has been put on you unfairly. And the same can be true with work in a less emotional way, but the same can be true there. Two people can have the exact same burden at work, and one person feels like this is my duty, my responsibility, and the other person feel like unfair burden that's been laid on me. Which one is happier? And which one's handling it better? Am I forced into the situation versus I choose to do what I can with the situation? I've seen a lot of really stressed out caregivers. I've worked with elderly clients who have these trooper husbands and wives that are taking them to the appointments and doing all these things. And I can really see the difference here, where some feel that this was so forced upon them, and who can blame them? They didn't choose for, say, their husband to get Alzheimer's. It's a very, very stressful, hard situation. But then there are some that feel like, no, they didn't choose for their husband to get Alzheimer's, but they are choosing to stick with him, and they are choosing to take care of him out of a sense of duty and responsibility, and they feel better about their role than the one that feels like this is just so unfairly put on me. And we've had that conversation sometimes where I've said, theoretically, you could leave, but I only say that to someone who I know they're not going to do that. I'm not giving them that advice. But when they think about that actually I do have a choice and I'm choosing to do what I think is right, it just feels a little bit better when we know we had a choice in the situation. Because when they think about that and they're like, there's no way, I would never do that. Like, well, then you're choosing the right thing. And yes, it is hard. It doesn't take away the problem. It just makes it a little bit easier to carry. If we're thinking it shouldn't be like this versus I expect life to be hard, or it will never be better versus this too shall pass. Or what does failure mean? Does it mean I'm worthless, or does it mean that everyone fails and we learn from failure? So you can see that just a slight.
And Sharon says in the chat here, we get to rather than have to.
Yes. Yeah. So is burnout just weakness and negative thinking? And who's at risk? That there have been studies done on this too. So, and I mentioned those examples in the beginning, and I felt like the three that I thought of right away, top of my head, they had something in common. They were very, very driven. People with a nature of perfectionism can be at higher risk. So it's good to be self-aware of our own nature and to say, like I said, it's not lazy people that get burnt out. But people that maybe have a high level of perfectionism or a high level of self-expectation, missing dissociation, that's where maybe we're not really able to turn off when at times. Some people have a higher level of fear and anxiety by nature even, and those are at a higher risk also. Excessive demands, it could come from our upbringing. It could be many different reasons. So I'm doing good on time here. Yeah, we have till 3 o'clock, right?
3 o'clock East Coast, noon Pacific.
Yeah,
yep.
That's right. So we got 20 more minutes. So I won't have time to go into detail on these, but when I'm done putting out the bullet points, maybe what I would recommend is snap a picture of this slide. This is going to be the slide that I hope will spark an interest in saying, I want to learn more about this. Everything on this slide are things that I've gathered from different things I've learned that I felt like had good scientific backing behind it, where they've done actual studies and they've seen actual results. So breathing techniques, we're gonna talk a little bit more about that. Mindfulness, some people call it meditation. I'm not, and we'll mention that a little bit more. I'm not talking about the spiritual, religious side of that, but the very much neurobiological side of that. Journaling, it's been proven in studies that people that journal are happier than people that don't, especially if you take the time to count your blessings. If you spend a little bit of time every night thinking about something good, you train your brain to notice those things when they're happening. Time management, there's lots to learn about that. If you're not familiar with Stephen Covey's 4 quadrants, urgent versus not urgent, that's a really good universal time management concept that's worth learning. Being proactive and not reactive, we've talked about that. That's a thread through even the Serenity Prayer and applying that in different situations. Also, I mentioned purposely exposing ourselves to acute stress and allowing ourselves recovery can train our resilience. I'll mention some examples of that. Exercise should probably have been on the top. So when we think about fight or flight is what our body is wanting to do, then it makes perfect sense to think that exercise would be one of the top methods for managing stress. Doing fun activities, that's a way to turn off and just have fun. And we get into a state of flow. And we could do a whole session on the concept of flow, but we won't have time for that. There's a good book on that by Milhani Csikszentmihalyi, who coined the term flow. Yoga or Tai Chi, so where we're stretching and focusing, and I'm talking about the Western version of this, not the spiritual religious type kind, but American yoga is basically a form of exercise and stretch, which is really good for stress management, and it includes breathing. So you're kind of doubling up on breathing, mindfulness, and exercise when you do that. Being in nature, studies have shown that even looking at pictures of nature lowers blood pressure. So not to underestimate the value of finding opportunity to be in nature. Sleep could be a whole week lesson on that. Healthy eating is big. The hardest part about doing this slide was to decide which order to put them in, because I want to put almost all of them first, and sleeping and eating and exercising should be up top. Unplugging, especially from social media. Socializing, it's been proving that kind of puts us a little bit in a state of flow, and it helps us detach a little bit. And that's been proven. Laughing is good medicine. So I'm going to leave that there in case somebody wanted to snap a picture of that and use it as a way to research further. And when I do my training, I teach more about each one of these. These are the individual level proven methods that we can do to improve our brain and body's ability to handle stress better. Well researched. Okay, so I want to make sure that we have time for questions in the end, and I also want to make sure I have time to show you those good stories about people that have done well. But I did promise that I would give you a quick fix calm down. I might even try something. I've never done this live before, so I don't know that it's going to work. But I'm going to hook myself up to a little. This is a little device that measures heart rate variability, which is one way to measure stress level. And I'll go back to my slide. There it is. Okay. So breathing, we could also do several lessons on breathing, but in short, remember I said that the whole stress response has to do with, it happens in our subconscious. So then we can say, well, how do we tell the amygdala to not tell the adrenal gland to, or to tell the adrenal gland to not fire off all this cortisol and all this stuff? If you hear, do you hear a little dinging? Okay, that's just in my ear then. That's from that device I'm using. But anyways, breathing is unique in our body in this way. It lies between our subconscious and our conscious. It's one of the very few functions that we have that's both. It's both. It both happens automatically, which is good. Otherwise, we would die. But we can shift our focus towards breathing, and we can decide to breathe in a certain way for a short time until our monkey brain starts wandering off into something else. We can't focus on our breathing for very long, but we can. And what that is, a backdoor into this limbic system. That's what it's called, this whole thing I was talking about. One way for us to affect our amygdala and our hippocampus and our even down to our adrenal gland is through breathing, because that brain structure listens to what the heart's doing. We can't directly tell our heart what to do, but when we change how we breathe, we change how our heart beats. And when our heart beats differently in a less stressed way, the amygdala picks up on that as one of the cues to say, oh, I guess this isn't a life-threatening situation. Let's lower it. So another, there's two words you might have heard of, is the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. You can think of those as the gas pedal and a brake pedal. The sympathetic nervous system activates us, the parasympathetic calms us down. Breathing is our pathway into the parasympathetic nervous system. We can actually cause ourselves physically to calm down through certain types of breathing, and it's been studied in depth. So here's the quick fix version. I'm gonna go back to this. Okay, this isn't going to be a great example because I'm already in green. I was thinking I would be in red, being I'm in the middle of a presentation. And I was going to show how.
Maybe I need to start talking about stressful things for you. I don't know.
You got to get me a little
yeah,
stressed
exactly. Should I start talking about, I don't know, politics, climate change? I don't know.
Something. Oh, there you go. Yeah, something like that might get me all revved up. So I hope I'm not putting you guys to sleep. But evidently, I'm in the green right now. But what that does is it measures heart rate variability, and that's one way to see in what state the heart is in right now. If it's in the basically where the sympathetic versus parasympathetic nervous system is. And then what we can do is do what's called a physiological sigh. When I do this, when I'm not presenting, it works 100% of the time. And I do this with my clients where I show them that while we're sitting here talking, I hook them up to this thing and I show them that right now you're sort of in the red, blue, green, back and forth. And then we do some breathing exercises and we go right into the green. It happens every time. So I'm going to teach you one breath. You can see the apps here. If you want to learn more, these are two really simple apps. The one on the bottom is super simple. It's just a breather pacer up and down. That's the one I've used when I'm in person coaching, because we can pull it up on the phone and we can just do it right there. If you want to learn more about breathing and the science behind it, and have an app that you can use, then breath work is really good. They have little animated videos that even explain how it works, and then you can choose different things depending on if you're trying to activate and be more focused or if you're trying to relax.
I've been using breath work almost every night now to fall asleep, help me fall asleep, and it really does work well.
Nice. When I'm coaching people, I include a subscription to breathwork on that, but that's something that you can find at the App Store, breathwork. So, okay, so here's the physiological sigh. You take it to this one will lower your sympathetic nervous system activity and cause your heart rate variability to improve. So it helps you calm, basically. And you may not even feel it because we're not very mindful and we're not very in tune. So we may not notice it, but a measuring device will. And it will help you think a little more big picture. So we want to quiet. What we're trying to do is quiet that noise between the amygdala and the hippocampus, so that the prefrontal cortex can get involved in what you're doing. So here's how you do it. It's simple. You breathe in, a normal breath in. And when it feels natural to stop, you stop. But then don't breathe out yet. You take a little sip of air on top of that one. Go. And then you breathe out really, really slow. And the slower you can breathe out, the better. So it sounds like this. And I can keep going, but you breathe out as slow as you can possibly can. And real quick, the slower you can breathe it out, the better carbon dioxide tolerance you have. And that's one measurement of how stressed you are and how able you are to handle stress, and that you can train. So if you're the type that want to measure something and you want to see if you're actually improving, because you might not feel a difference when you're doing this, you can actually take a stopwatch and measure how long can you drag it out, your exhale out for. And if you're under 20 seconds, you got a lot of work to do. If you can get over 40, you're getting there. But if you practice this every day, you will get better, which means that when stressors happens to you, you're going to be able to tolerate them better. That is the physiological sigh. And then I also threw in the carbon dioxide tolerance test on that. So Then mindfulness. There's a 6-week course on mindfulness. So what I'm going to say right now is the Western version of mindfulness has been well researched. It's been well researched, and the one study that really caught my attention was soldiers came back from Afghanistan, and on a brain scan, their amygdala was physically larger. You could see that it was larger because, much like a muscle that's been worked really hard, they were under a lot of true life-threatening stress, and it actually grew, and it was hyperactive. They did a control group. They had one group practice, and I want to say it was 10 minutes a day, if I remember right, of mindfulness. And they did I think a body scan. So it's a guided, it's a voice that basically says, take a deep breath, focus on your feet right now, or focus on your different body parts. That's one simple form. It's called guided. It's called a body scan. Anyways, they did different forms like that, and they just spent a few minutes a day doing it. Then they compared it after 6 weeks, and there was a difference in size of amygdala on the people that had practiced compared to the ones that had not. It had shrunk. That's convincing to me because you can actually see it on a brain scan that they were now less stressed and were more able to calm themselves down and turn off this constant like fear that there's a life-threatening situation. If you want to learn more about mindfulness, the one on the left I really recommend as a starting point. It's called Headspace, and much like breathworks, it explains the science behind it, and then it has simple guides. There's some free stuff, and then there's a paid version. But there are other apps too. So you have Calm is a very, very nice app. 10% Happier is a nice app. That one is actually a CD, but we're probably getting away from CDs more and more. So that's a word on mindfulness. And then I'll give you one other little quick visualization that you can use. When you leave your office, if you have a hard time turning off work at home, when you're not wanting to think about work, I'm not saying it's wrong to think about work at home. There's times when we have problems, we gotta let them ruminate in our head so we can solve them. But there's definitely times we wish we weren't thinking about work. And we need times when we're not thinking about work. It's absolutely crucial for our mental health. One kind of simple visualization we can do is, when you actually physically leave the office, make a little scene to yourself. Be mindful about you closing the door to that office, and think that now you're closing the door to this office and you're leaving all the work there, and it will be there when you get there tomorrow. And when you catch yourself thinking, ruminating about work at home, go back to that visual of you closing the door to the office. It can actually work. It can help us, and it trains our brain to like disassociate from it when that's a good thing to do. So there's another little quick one for you to take home. I won't get into this, but I was curious. I knew that there would be some accountants here, so I found a study that specifically had worked on accountants, and it was from 2010. But their conclusion was that for accountants, negative effects of role stress and job burnout can be mitigated by a healthy lifestyle. It was a pretty large study, and they looked at people that were engaging in a more healthy lifestyle had a much lower rate of role stress and job burnout.
Am I reading this right, that there's a journal that is titled Behavioral Research in Accounting?
Yeah.
Like a whole journal just for that?
There is a journal about everything.
I think I found my new my new subscription.
Yeah, I have to look in. I don't know how often it's published or anything, but it's a scientific journal, I guess. That was kind of fascinating, yeah. And now it's not going to the next slide. Okay, there we go. Real short, what to do during busy season. Oh man, we're pushing it for time. Accountants have busy seasons, tax seasons, quarterly, and my real quick short advice would be, when you're not in the busy season, like a soldier that's not in war, you're preparing yourself, you're preparing your resilience, implement your new habits, practice these things, get in the habit of exercise, get in the habit of sleeping, getting in the habit of eating better, practice mindfulness, practice breathing. During the busy season, you narrow that down to what you feel like you can handle. These things shouldn't be additional stressors on you. So there's times when you're not training, you're using what you have trained for. But don't put it all to the side. Just like Michael related of, during that stressful time, you can also think, now it is even more important that I use these practices that I have tried to create habits out of, because now is the time that I need to be as strong as I can possibly be, so that I don't hit the wall. I see that we're out of time, so I'm not gonna linger on this. Cold that you can purposely expose yourself to different acute stressors. Cold exposure, hard exercise. You may have heard of the Wim Hof breathing. That's not a calming breathing. That's actually a breathing that creates stress in your body, but it helps build stress resilience. So I'm gonna fly through this now. So how do I work with businesses? I work on those 4 components, and I actually usually start with eating. We were talking about stress today, but I'm going to show you in one of the stories why eating can be a good place to start. We work on exercise. Here's another little stat. People that start to exercise will improve their productivity by 15%. So one study showed. I mentioned, and you saw here, 88% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy. That's almost everybody. And if you want to know one way to know if you're metabolically unhealthy, this is kind of brutal, but just be honest with yourself. Put a tape measure around your waist. If your waist is more than half of what your length is, then you're probably metabolically unhealthy and probably heading towards insulin resistance, which is the precursor to diabetes. That's actually a fairly accurate way to measure stress recovery and sleep. So I work on those 4 parts to create habits to build resilience and ability to handle life. One way that I track that with my clients is with this technology called First Beat. It's a heart rate variability monitor that you wear for a few days, and we get all kinds of nice data from that, so we can actually measure the progress. We can see you get a stress recovery balance score, and a sleep restorative effects of sleep score, health effects of physical activity score, and overall perceived well-being score. We get all kinds of data. We keep journaling, and we can actually analyze. And as we start trying different things in life, we can see what effect they have. So I love that fact that we can measure. If I work on a team level, I can also produce team level reports that are anonymous, so you don't know who is who, but we can say that this team, your sales team, is scoring this way on life and on stress and on sleep and on activity. We can also distinguish. So here, for example, was a group of 161 employees, and we could say 40 of them needed attention and 11 were at high risk. So that can give the company and the organization a picture of the general health in the company. And if I continue to work with the organization, we can actually see progress over time. So in short, the way I work is we start off with an assessment. We can do a group assessment, put this monitor on a whole team, and then then we analyze the data, and I provide training, much like today, but we can do that at a team level. But I can also coach at an individual level, and we measure results and follow up. So I am sorry, we are 2 minutes before. So let me fly through this because I do want to show you the last graph. These are just some of the results of one of my coaching clients that are really exciting. Just peek at those because I want to respect your time. And then this is another one of my clients. Of course, it's not the real name, but I'm going to show you his graph. I think that's all we have time to do. This was his weight loss graph. So he did lose quite a bit of weight in the first 6 months, but this is the graph I wanted to show you. This is based on that First Beat measurement. So we started in January. The green one is his exercise. The yellow one is his sleep. The red one is his stress recovery score that he got from wearing that monitor. We started off by addressing food. So he didn't start exercising. He didn't really want to exercise. But because he started eating better and he started feeling better. So by February, by March, really, he was ready to start exercising because he was starting to feel better. So you can see that he was starting to feel better. His sleep and his stress was still the same. But he did start to exercise because he was eating better, I believe. He felt well enough to get interested in moving his body more, and then he started moving his body more, and then you can really see things start happening. He did also start implementing stress management techniques like breathing and other things, but it's hard to point to which one was it that had the effect. But it's a beautiful graph, I think, to see how his quality of life has improved. So he's gone from the 30s out of 100 up to 80s. So the blue one is his overall life score. Exercising, he got up into 100, which it doesn't take a whole lot of exercise to get 100 on that. But then the sleep and stress management score has continually gone up. Beautiful. And again, I apologize that there's so little time for questions, but I'm going to stop there. And if somebody does, I can stay over a few minutes if somebody does have a question.
Yeah,
and
perfect.
Thank you everybody for bearing with me. I know I packed in, was moving kind of fast.
Yeah, and feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question, or type it in the chat there.
I don't have any questions, but I wanted to say thank you so much for your presentation because it was fascinating to me. And I already practice a lot of this stuff, and I know it's not necessarily new information, but really fascinating stuff. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that feedback. Yeah. And maybe I should say, of course, the last slide. Well, Michael can give you my contact information. If anybody's interested, I can do a presentation at your company or meet with you and talk about your specific situation. There's a link that you can just schedule an appointment with me if you like, and that's complimentary.
Corrine asked, can we see the slide on ways to build resilience again?
Yes. So let me jump back to sharing screen. I'm not sharing screen right now, am I?
No, you're not.
Okay, so just back to that there. Okay, so let me share my screen again. See. Just back up. You're probably thinking, oh. Sorry, that's probably a faster way of doing this, but I'll just work my way back. I think it was right towards the end. Is this the one you were thinking about? Yeah, that's probably another one I should say. Just snap a picture of that, since I didn't have time to really go into much on each one of those, but those are some suggestions.
It's interesting you said that the Wim Hof actually is increasing stress, increasing the sympathetic nervous system, or activating that in order to build your stress resilience. I didn't realize that.
We can kind of feel calm in a way after we do it, but I think it's sort of like a focused calm, more of a stimulant than a relaxer. So that can be a really good one to do during work hours because it kind of wakes us up if we're tired.
Well, it doesn't look like there's any other questions in the chat anyway. Ryan McDaniel says, good stuff. Thank you. Jonathan says, really liked what you were talking about. Great info. And Diana says, hopped on late, but what I heard was great information. So yeah, thank you guys. Thank everybody for coming, and thank you very much, Robert, for jumping on and sharing this. I'm really pleased that you were able to come on and share that with the people that regularly jump on my webinars here. So that was awesome.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Okay, well, Thank you. Yeah, and if any of you guys want to try to get a hold of Robert, let me know, and I'll shoot you his contact information.
Very good.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Yep. Bye-bye.